Alright, what's up everybody? So before we get started with the video, I of course want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas. I hope that you'll be spending the coming holidays in good health with friends and family, hopefully. And I wish you all the best for 2023 coming up, of course. I figured, what better Christmas present to give you all than to talk about Uncharted on the channel, right? It's been a while, and yeah, I don't know, but just thinking about the games, I'm not sure if you'll all be on board with me here, but I feel like you will. It's immediately bringing back the nostalgia, and that's just the thing about a timeless series like Uncharted. Every single time diving back into it, which I did in preparing for this video, playing through a little bit of Uncharted 4 on the Legacy of Thieves collection, I was reminded once again just how much I love this franchise. And I don't think that can ever... There's just, too many memories there. I grew up with this series, and that's something that can never be taken away from me. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Uncharted over on the channel is that it was actually about a week or two ago that we had a new rumor about it potentially getting rebooted. This was brought to us by a website called TheLeak, which apparently is relatively credible, has made a lot of right calls in the past, and they indicated that sources had told them not only was Uncharted getting rebooted, it would be a completely different studio other than Naughty Dog at the helm of it, which of course is quite a noteworthy thing to keep in mind. And I think that's the thing overall about the future of Uncharted. These rumors, we keep hearing about them. Every few months something appears to be leaking out of the grapevine, telling us, indicating to us that Sony is working on continuing the franchise. And I think I myself have been very open about it plenty of times, where I don't know on a personal level whether I even want this franchise to be continued. I think many of my own viewers struggle with the same exact question, where many people say Uncharted had such a fantastic run, it ended so beautifully. Why would you want to pick that back up and continue with it? Now, of course, the answer to that from Sony's perspective is very simple, and it is money. And we know, and this is why I will always say that I have to maintain realism here. I have to simply be realistic about the fact that the chance is very, very high that Uncharted is still getting a sequel, a reboot, whatever you want to call it. Uncharted is going to be continued. We've already seen that. Not only with the fact that, of course, they decided to do this Uncharted movie literally earlier this year still, right? 6 years after Uncharted 4 had already released. If there was never, a future for this franchise in store anymore, why the hell would you still bother with the movie in the first place, right? We know from simply looking at the sales numbers that Uncharted 4 continues to be among the highest selling PlayStation 4 exclusives. I think it is top 3, sold nearly 20 million copies, keep that in mind. And especially combining that with the fact that we know Sony right now has the strategy of focusing this much on their big properties, their big IP, just add all of it up together, and I think it is inevitable that Uncharted still has a future ahead of itself. I think Sony is even honestly preparing us for that, not only with, for example, the release of Uncharted The Legacy of Thieves collection, which coincided with the Uncharted movie and came out earlier this year, but it's also these strange random moments every now and then. Like, I remember seeing a certain ad for the Champions League, I think that was last year, where in full glory Nathan Drake was visible there among Aloy, Kratos, Ratchet & Clank, and I think honestly that was a very limited list of PlayStation characters they specifically decided to highlight. And it's like, once again, ask yourself that question. We haven't heard from Nathan Drake since 2016. Why would they still bother putting him so prominently on some of these ads when you know that there is no future ahead for Nathan Drake anymore? Well, the simple reason for that is there obviously is. So the big question, one of the two biggest questions to then ask ourselves, I should say, is who the hell is even going to be making this game in the first place if it's not Naughty Dog? Because as I just talked about, in the most recent leak coming out of a website called TheLeak.co, I think, which, apparently is quite credible, but I will say that I take all these rumors with a grain of salt as per usual, right? It said that Naughty Dog would not be the one responsible for the game. Now, that of course does coincide with a couple of other leaks we've had in the past. I think especially about this big article that came out of Jason Schreier back in 2021, actually highlighting what a lot of the Sony studios had been up to. talking, for example, about Sony Bend, who apparently was assigned initially to work on the future of Uncharted, the next game that would be coming out. And at the time, Sony Bend themselves were even worried that they were essentially becoming a support studio for Naughty Dog, and that Sony wanted them to, simply work on this rather than actually building out a new franchise of their own, which is what had their own preference at the time. Sony definitely, and of course this is it's a big question not only for us, it's a big question for PlayStation, because what studios do you have to actually make responsible then for building out Uncharted? When Naughty Dog is focused on The Last of Us and, potentially a different new IP, when you've got Sony Santa Monica obviously too busy with God of War, and also I think a new IP that they're working on right now with Cory Barlog at the helm of it. Sucker Punch is doing Ghost of Tsushima, as we know, Guerrilla is doing Horizon. All these studios currently have massive franchises that they're already busy with. There is no different studio to assign to this huge IP that you have that might be bigger than some of the others that I just talked about. Sony Bend there was always the ideal candidate. The reason for that is not only because they obviously worked on Uncharted Golden Abyss, they made that spin-off game for the PlayStation Vita and therefore had experience with the Uncharted franchise already. It's also a studio that I think has slowly built out to become on a relatively similar level to all the before mentioned studios. Days Gone, of course, many people did have their issues with it, but I do truly believe that Sony Bend, with a little bit more, budget potentially to receive for their projects, more people that they can hire, Sony Bend can grow out to be on the same level as many of these other studios. But like I said, there is also their own desires, their own wish not to work on a franchise that technically isn't theirs, but that they want their own creative freedom and to work on something that is fully theirs. I totally get that desire from them on their part. So what PlayStation is left with right now is a big dilemma. Who do we put to work on this new Uncharted game? Now, there as well, and I think it's honestly the obvious answer, is that maybe they need to be building a whole new studio from the ground up. And so a couple of months back, we actually had some more rumors coming out of this too, where a job listing was posted over on the PlayStation website, saying that they were seeking a game design intern to work at a new PlayStation studio based in San Diego, co-developing an exciting new project with Naughty Dog in a beloved franchise. Once again, I think it is very likely to be assumed that this could be a new Uncharted that is being talked about here, where this new PlayStation studio based in San Diego is also, by the way, working together with the Visual Arts Service Group, which, as you might remember, was the team that originally started the Last of Us remake, only for it to then later be taken over by Naughty Dog. All of this seems to point at Sony behind the scenes is building up a team, perhaps taking some of the old talent, some of the old leadership back in the Uncharted days, working over at Naughty Dog, combining that with some people in Visual Arts Service Group, hiring new people in the process, and trying to build something from scratch, from the ground up, to continue with the franchise. So that leaves us with the last question to talk about, and it's honestly a whole different topic in and of itself. What is Uncharted 5 even going to be about? Now, I call it Uncharted 5 because it's easy to call it that, but I do believe we are talking about a revitalization of this series. We are talking about, as the rumors also indicated, a reboot, which could be, seen as like a quote-unquote name to give it. A reboot doesn't have to mean that we're gonna be playing, for example, as Drake and pretending like the previous adventures never happened. I do very much think that whatever this new Uncharted game is still takes all the previous material in mind and considers it, totally as canon. All of those adventures still will have happened. This is not a reboot like the Modern Warfare series got or anything like that. It's going to simply be a restart, rather, which of course has many different possibilities for what direction it is headed in. Now, the two easy options in that regard, which I actually don't think will be happening, is that first of all, you could of course continue with Chloe and Nadine. Uncharted The Lost Legacy was a pretty big success. Most, I think, core fans of the franchise still ended up really liking the game. It's of course a solid foundation to continue with. In the same vein, you could also decide to do a different type of spin-off game, for example with Sam and Sully, as many people already requested back when Uncharted 4 came out, and we were still speculating about what this supposed DLC at the time was going to be, right? That being said, I will say that we know, for example, out of Sully's actor, Richard McGonigal, that he is basically retired, seems to be living in a whole different part of America, and appears to be basically done. I don't even really think you could call him back, but of course that could always change. At the same time, I will say about this, is that there's two problems with a continuation like this. Is that first of all, I don't think it's really future-proof. I am sure that what Sony truly wants with the Uncharted franchise is to set it up in a way where you can still have room for plenty of sequels to follow. If Uncharted is to be continued, it's not just going to be with one game. It's going to be with multiple different entries over the course of a, decade-long perhaps time span. And so, will Chloe and Nadine really be potential candidates for that? If we're being completely honest about Uncharted The Lost Legacy, I mean, I myself really liked the game. I do think it lacked the impact compared to, the mainline Uncharted games. It did actually very much make me realize in the end that while I said during my review even when The Lost Legacy came out that it was kind of proof that there was still a future for Uncharted without Drake, I actually started to feel a little bit differently about that as time passed by. Not only because I realized that ultimately it just didn't leave the impact that any of the mainline Uncharted's did. We can also very much look at the sales numbers, and they tell a simple story how Lost Legacy did not sell nearly as well as any of the mainline Uncharted games did. And so what that means is that people still, the casual audience at least, they want Drake. And I think that's, once again, it is a realization that hit me, that like Drake really is the icon of Uncharted. Drake, Sully, and Elena, but Drake himself especially, of course, is what people very much find to be synonymous with the name Uncharted. And it's exactly why we see Drake still being used in those ads of the Champions League, like I talked about, because that's who people associate with Uncharted as a name, right? And therefore you also have a different option, which is that you could potentially do a new prequel with Drake in the same vein that you did Uncharted Golden Abyss. Now, the problem you run into there is that, once again, I don't think it's a future-proof enough concept where you can do several of those prequels. At least I would think. I also do feel that if people already know, that Drake ends up fine in future games, it's just like something like a prequel like this in the same vein that we saw, for example, with God of War Ascension. It never ends up performing as well, and I think that would very much be the same situation with an Uncharted potential prequel. So what we're ultimately left with at the end of the day is only really one option, and it is of course the option that most people do talk about, that I myself also very much believe is what is likely to be the candidate that's going to be picked, let's put it like that, is a post-Uncharted 4 continuation, maybe some years into the future, past that Uncharted 4 epilogue. Yeah, involving likely Cassie, Drake's daughter, right? It's the only way that I can imagine them being able to also bring back Drake, whether in a Sully type of role or whether they're gonna make him playable in some type of sense. You could add all the other characters still back in some kind of way, but I think what is very much the difficult part about it is that you're going for a different direction also that could potentially be a lot darker or something, because this is kind of what I've been thinking about, right? But like, what has always formed the base for the Uncharted games is the fact that Drake very much willfully put himself into these scenarios. It was the fact that back in the old games, Uncharted 1, 2, and 3, Drake by himself had this obsession with treasure. He put himself in danger, went to go after illegal treasure and fought with all these basically groups over that particular treasure. Uncharted 4, of course, already was a bit of a different setup where he was half forced into it, but at the same time, of course, eager to dive back in, decided to lie to Elena, and the whole game was this process of him coming to the realization that he had to take responsibility, right? And they did it so well, not only showing us through Elena's eyes, for example, that dilemma Drake very much had with wanting to do something that he absolutely loved, thinking about the dinner scene back at the table with all the pirate captains, where she sees that passion in him, right? But then at the same time, the conversation he has with Sam near the mountain, literally telling him, we're not those kids anymore. We can't do this and involve people that we love, putting them in danger too. That's the problem Drake always struggled with. It's the exact reason why he constantly ended up breaking up with Elena in the process in between games, is that, yeah, he had to pick and choose, what he was going to keep and what he was going to let go, the way he himself worded it. And at the end of Uncharted 4, we see that, where you know, Elena, of course, recognizes that struggle that he always had too, and gives him this option of, we're going to find a way to not have you live that completely normal life. We're going to still go on adventures, but we're going to do it the safe, legal way. We're going to have our own company here, go on plenty of adventures still to come, but not get ourselves in the same trouble that we did in the past. And I think, again, if you then still want to make a game out of the next Uncharted that is inevitably going to feature, you know, combat, for example, right? As I can only imagine it will, it's gonna force them to get themselves willfully into trouble again. And I don't see Drake himself going that route anymore. Cassie, of course, could, but it's automatically going to make it a darker game then too. Because I can only imagine we're going to either accidentally get ourselves into trouble and be forced to fight our way out, sort of, you know, the Tomb Raider reboot style, to put it like that, or Cassie gets abducted, Drake does, and maybe as Cassie we're gonna have to rescue him in some type of way. But now that family is truly involved, Drake has a daughter here who he does not want to go on this similar path. It's still very hard for me to see a reason, or a way rather, I should say, yeah, for this story to ultimately make sense at the end of the day, and for a whole series of games to be warranted in a natural, organic way that makes sense for the storyline overall. At the same time, it's very hard to tell what other additions are going to be happening to the series, how it's going to be received. Are we going to like it all as much? Is Cassie going to have new friends coming along with her on the way? What's Cassie's own personality going to be like, being, I can only imagine, 10 years older or so compared to where we saw her in the Uncharted 4 epilogue? Yeah, are they going to bring back other characters? Once again, I don't see Sully in any way still being able to be a part of this. And then it's that, you know, super obvious question of, is it still going to carry Uncharted's identity? Is it going to feel as fun? Is it going to feel, yeah, lighthearted? I can't quite see that happening with everything that I just talked about. But if it is, how is it going to compare to the older games? It's just, this is really the problem that you create when you have a set list of games that not only got to have the privilege of ending so wonderfully. The Uncharted main 4 chapters, to put it like that, all feel like they're part of one massive journey that we've been able to go on, right? All of it fits. It's a perfect collection of games. To then create something new out of that still is supposed to add to everything that happened, you're kind of just asking to screw up the legacy in that kind of way. It's super easy to see a Star Wars type of situation where we know how those sequel movies were received compared to the original trilogy. And for that reason, I myself have always been the biggest believer in perhaps taking the name Uncharted, but trying to go in as much of a different direction as you possibly can. You know, I myself have kicked around certain ideas of like, oh, what if we actually go back in time and we follow, for example, some of the legendary explorers that were either already being tracked by Drake in the main Uncharted games, or maybe different explorers entirely, right? Have it take place hundreds of years ago in completely different settings. Kind of, you know, still use the name Uncharted, of course, but make like a linear version of, you know, the old school Assassin's Creed games. I really do believe that that could work. I think it could be very well received. It's something that PlayStation hasn't really done before yet, and it carries a lot of potential with it to make something cool out of it that could still, once again, have the name Uncharted, could still be about hunting treasure, but at the same time could do it in a completely different time period, setting, different style of combat, so that in that way, if those games aren't as well received, even if in the worst case scenarios those games simply don't perform as well, they won't detract in any type of way from the legacy that the Uncharted name still has, and that the let's say the Nathan Drake games have, because we all appreciate them so much and they have such emotional value, you know, to us all on a personal level. Now, with that being said, guys, these were all my thoughts, everything that I've wanted to share with you all about the future of Uncharted. This is where I currently stand right now. Let me know, of course, in the comments, how do you feel about a potential Uncharted 5 happening? What would you want it to be about if it did happen, and if there was simply no avoiding it? Let me know all of that in the comments, of course. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel hit the notification bell, because my plan is to continue uploading gaming discussions here on a weekly basis. Yeah, based on whatever news we do get out of the industry. With that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in. Once again, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas. You can, of course, check out my second channel as well, where I still do reaction videos on a daily basis. And I have, for example, right now, my God of War Ragnarok playthrough going on. And then I want to thank you a lot for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.